Good morning, Mr. Arlinghouse. Today is April the 1st, and this is no joke. That exam date is closing in on us, and I'm really starting to get more panicky than I want to make some historical joke, but I can't. More panicky than the driver of the SS Everyman that was stuck in the Suez Canal. That's not a very good joke. I'm sorry, Mr. Arlinghouse. Let us proceed, shall we? So now we shift to Great Britain after the war. Just because France and Britain won the war, that did not mean their problems were over. In fact, immediately there were just a whole new set of issues. World War One profoundly changed British politics, if not the political system of Britain. Now in Britain, all men over 21 and all women, because they're less mature, over 30 could vote. Lloyd George won re-election, but could only keep it as long as the Conservative Party were in power. I'll tell you, Mr. Arlinghouse, I do not fully understand the British political system. I mean, they don't have regularly scheduled elections like we do. A party can be called to question. The leadership of a party can be called to question, and also they can have an election. So anyway, but the economy never recovered under conservatives. In fact, look at that term, accepting the dole, became an expectation for many. You say, what's the dole? Is that like pineapple? No. The dole meant to, accepting the dole was also called getting in the dole line. It meant going on public relief. It meant accepting monetary payments, basically what we would call unemployment, which included food as well as money. Anyway, conservatives then replaced George with Andrew Bonar Law. Stanley Baldwin then replaced Law. Baldwin abandoned free trade, and it cost him the next election. The Labour Party held the plurality of Parliament. So what does that mean? It means that there's not a majority of Parliament, but the Labour Party was able to swing the vote between the Conservatives and the Liberals. And whoever had the Labour Party support, Conservative or Liberal, would win the election, would pass the legislation. And King George asked Labour Party leader Ramsay MacDonald to form the first Labour Party ministry in British history. The Labour Party was socialistic in its policies. We're going to see that after World War One. Forgive me, Mr. Arlinghouse, I'm going to have to excuse myself. And we're back, Mr. Arlinghouse. I had to sneeze. So yes, World War One is going to the aftermath of World War One is going to cause the British government to trend socialist, to pick up more and more socialist policies, such as, well, as it says here, the Labour Party signaled the beginning of the end of the Liberal Party in English Parliament politics. The Labour Party, you say, what does that mean? Well, unemployment insurance, for example, in Britain. All sorts of control of many of the national industries. The Labour Party was toppled by charges they had not adequately prosecuted a communist writer. Stanley Baldwin then returned to office. The government returned to the gold standard, and we've talked about that before. The gold standard is a monetary system where the amount of currency in circulation is equal to the amount of gold that the government holds in storage, which greatly reduces the amount of currency in circulation. He raised the price of the pound too high and raised the price of British goods for foreign markets, which meant that people wouldn't buy them in foreign markets. The British tried to lower wages to make British goods affordable. There was a great general strike in 1926. Note But the actual living standard through the Baldwin years, however, actually improved for most people. The war had weakened greatly the British Empire. The British had actually had to take aid, monetary aid, and military aid from its former colony, Canada. They had begun to talk about Indian independence. Thank you, Gandhi. But that's going to not happen until 1947. In Ireland, the Home Rule Bill passed, but was not implemented until 1922. The Easter Uprising of 1916 was suppressed and the leadership was executed. And the problem with that was that the execution of those leaders made those leaders martyrs. Leadership of the Irish political wing shifted to the more radical Sinn Féin. Remember, we talked about Sinn Féin, Mr. Arlinghouse. Sinn Féin is a Gaelic word. It means we ourselves. What is ironic about this is that in the 1920s, they were considered radicals. Today, the Sinn Féin is the moderate wing of the Irish movement. The military wing of Sinn Féin became the IRA, the Irish Republican Army. We're going to talk a lot more about these guys when we get into the 80s, 70s, and 80s, Mr. Arlinghouse. But yeah, its first president was Eamon de Valera. The IRA were also called the Black and Tans. In 1921, Ireland became the so-called Irish Free State, except for the 6 counties of Northern Ireland. Let's go to the map, shall we? Now, here you have pictured Britain and Ireland united because this was right after World War I. But in 1922, the UK, Ireland will become free, the southern part of Ireland, but like it says, the 6 counties right here that have a tremendously large number of English loyalists became known as Northern Ireland. And so today the UK is made up of England, this is Wales here, Scotland, and Northern Ireland. And then, of course, Ireland is a completely different free state. So, yeah, this is another term. Del Irean means the Irish Parliament. Okay. The successor states of Europe were the ones who left the Austrian, Russian, and German empires and the Ottoman Empire. Many of these states were intended to provide a buffer zone against Russian Bolshevism. I said once again, Mr. Arlinghouse, remember, nobody was really worried about Nazism in the 1920s. They were very worried about communism. The new states had no history of parliamentary government and therefore were unprepared for parliamentary government. Once again, one of the worst things in the world is to just suddenly thrust freedom on a people. None of the new states were financially stable, with the possible exception of Czechoslovakia. The rest of the states were hit very hard by the Depression, which we're going to talk about later, as these states were all primarily agricultural. These states also were often beset by ethnic differences within the states, as the states were not established on purely ethnic lines. There were still ethnic minorities in all of these states. The Jews, the Roma. In Czechoslovakia, there were Germans in the Sudetenland that they were discriminated against. It's one of Hitler's biggest gripes. Poland went from being a democracy to being the victim of a coup in 1926 by General Marshal Joseph Piłsudski. Czechoslovakia had cooperated with the Allies in World War I and did form a democratic government. But the Germans in the Sudetenland, there's that word again, Sudetenland, 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 said it again and again, in the Sudetenland clamored for their ethnic home rule. In other words, they wanted to be ruled by either Germany or rule themselves. Hungary was now divided from Austria but faced turmoil. Bela Kun, a communist, ruled Hungary for a while. but was defeated by a Romanian army who was sent in to destroy the communist threat. Admiral Miklos Horthy became the regent of Hungary then. Kuhn was murdered by Stalin. We hadn't even mentioned that guy, Stalin's thugs, because he cooperated too much with the socialists. Yeah, Stalin doesn't get the proper billing for being the butcher that he was. During the 1920s, Count Stephen Bethlen and General Julius Gombos, who was anti-Semitic, rigged elections, ruled Hungary. Anti-Semitism became a staple of Hungarian politics. For what it's worth, Mr. Arlinghouse, after World War II, there will be less than 4,000 Jews left alive in Hungary. That was, of course, the Nazis doing, but lots of Hungarians were more than willing to turn the Jews over to the Nazis. Austria tried to resist Nazi infiltrators, but was unsuccessful. We're going to learn a word here later on called der Anschluss. Well, no, it's in your test, I remember. Der Anschluss was the German takeover of Austria in 1938. Engelbert Dollfuss became chancellor. He outlawed every party in Austria except for the Christian Socialists, the Agrarians, and the paramilitarists, who composed an organization called the Fatherland Front. What was the Fatherland Front? It was a group very similar to our militias, those friendly folks who tried to visit the Capitol on January the 6th. I'm being facetious. He was shot during a Nazi coup that was unsuccessful. In Yugoslavia, the Corfu Agreement, which is on your test, had established a country that was dominated by Serbs who fought the Roman Catholic Croats. Yes, and then, of course, and we're not even mentioning the Bosnian Muslims. This led to a dictatorship under King Alexander I, a Serb. He outlawed political parties and was later assassinated. In most of the successor states, one authoritarian government, meaning in the Austrian states, the Austrian government, or the German state, the German government, Russian states, but most of them simply replaced one one authoritarian government with another, just a smaller government. What you need to get out of this, Mr. Arlinghouse, is that all of these so-called successor states were not stable, with the possible exception of Czechoslovakia, but the rest of them were, just going from one coup, one strong man to another. All right, Roman numeral 27. There it is. The Weimar Republic ruled Germany immediately after World War I and will rule until 1933. The Social Democrats and the Weimar Republic were always associated with defeatism because they signed the Versailles Treaty. On the other hand, they either had to accept the Versailles Treaty or they would be invaded and there would be nothing they could do about it. All political groups in Germany, all of them, moderate, extremist, Nazi, Democratic, all of them shared a desire to either revise or reform or completely get rid of the Versailles Treaty. Because of this needs to be capitalized, Mr. Horton. Because of this, there were varying degrees of loyalty to the Weimar Republic. The Weimar Republic was a highly enlightened document in its intention, but intentions, they say the path to hell is lined with them. But it had flaws. Number one, it provided for proportional representation for all elections. What does that mean? It means that the various parties, all of whom would have a proportion of the House of the Reichstag. Small parties could work their way into power, such as the National Socialists, the Nazis. The president was appointed and removed by chancellors. And this one here's the big one. Pardon me. Article 48 allowed the president to rule by decree, to be a dictator in an emergency. This permitted a temporary presidential dictatorship. To be honest, that's how Adolf Hitler came to dominate Germany. The Weimar Republic did not command the respect or loyalty of many Germans. Many important officials favored a constitutional monarchy. Still, a lot of people in Germany said, bring the Kaiser back. Let's have just have a constitutional monarchy. Many of these same professionals had loyally served the Kaiser and hated the Social Democrats. The officers in the army felt they had been betrayed by the civilians at home because when they surrendered on foreign soil. In March 1920, a right-wing Kapp-Putsch armed insurrection, actually kind of like what happened January the 6th, erupted in Berlin. Led by a local civil servant and supported by the army, the coup failed. But the coup failed only after the government had fled the city and there was a general strike. Later in the month, strikes took place in the Ruhr. The government sent in troops to restore order. Extremism from the left and the right would haunt the Republic for all of its days. In May of 1921, the Allies presented a reparation bill to the German government for 132 billion gold marks. You say, let's capitalize. Well, marks. That was the German currency. My first trip to Germany was in 1989, and we visited 6 countries, and I had to get 6 currencies, which actually was kind of fun for me. But I don't have to, don't have to do day-to-day transactions in Europe. The euro is a much better currency, but don't tell the English that. But yeah, but no. In Germany, we had Deutschmarks. We went to East Germany. There were East German Deutschmarks. At the time I was there, the exchange rate for Deutschmarks, it was approximately 2, maybe 1 3/4 Deutschmark for $1. The German government accepted this only after the threat of occupation. Violence marked the first 5 years of the Weimar Republic, as assassination of Republican leaders took place regularly. Inflation brought on the major crisis of the era. Yes. I'm going to pause now, Mr. Arnhouse, if you don't mind. Back, Mr. Arnhouse. What I wanted to show you was this. This is a very famous picture of German children playing with, these are stacks of Weimar Republic notes that they're playing with building blocks. This was during the worst period of the Weimar Republic's inflation. And Mr. Arlinghouse, I'll leave that picture there, and I will pick it up again tomorrow.